WSKY SkyRock Talk Radio, where the rock don't stop, baby. Woo! A-Town, we're on the air. Welcome. I'm the voice behind the rock, your host, rocking at the speed of light, Rockin Rog. We're starting pro front limousine ride, jet flying in, willing, dealing like no man can. So lock it in and rip that knob off of it, baby. Woo! Welcome, baby, to the place for perseverance, passion, purpose, struggles, and breakthroughs, friendships, you and I, baby, and new beginnings. The place that changes the way you live. We've been diving into setbacks that were really setups for major success stories. You've been listening in our prior episode, baby, to an incredible people, exactly like you and me. But they've done a few things a little bit differently, or they've done a few things a little bit longer. And that's what makes them amazing. Every day we got to remind ourselves that we're only one small decision away from our next success story. This is season 2, episode 2. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, giving us feedback, words of encouragement. Listen, we hear you. Thank you. Thank you for subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can hear us on all platforms. All podcast platforms, Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Amazon Alexa, Chromecast Player, Google Podcasts, Overcast, MyTuner, and YouTube. Thank you for listening. Make sure you like us, subscribe, share it to be a blessing to someone else. Because we're in this together. We're coming together to build the strongest rocking, reaching our community, reaching our city, reaching our country with kindness movement social media in your area has ever seen. Because the more we share our story, your story, the more lives we can change. Thank you for joining this movement. Join our Facebook group, WSKY SkyRock Talk Radio. Hit us up on our website, SkyRockTalkRadio.com. Thank you for listening. Show some love by clicking the support link on our website, and always remember, every dollar counts towards spreading kindness throughout our city. Reserve our best for the best. Let's don't waste time on things or even people who are not there to help us grow. Arguments where we are trying to prove ourselves or defend ourselves only causes us to erode our self-esteem of who we want to become. Let's don't build on sand when we know somewhere else there is solid ground. Let's invest in life-changing moments that will make us smile, make us feel confident, make us feel powerful, and especially loved. If we find ourselves being undermined by a friend, a family member, or even a coworker, stop before we react. Only respond. Remember what comes out of us, and not worry about what is trying to get into us. Let's be brave and let's say, you know what? I've got a bright future and my days are blessed. No need to block my positive energy and the positive things coming to me by wrestling with the negative. Let's release it, because if we don't, it will never release us. Never sleep with anger or content in our heart. Let's awake with a smile. Let's awake with an eager spirit. And let's awake and ready to run. Love and kindness to you. Be kind and love always, person to person, one kindness at a time. And let's reach our community, our city, and our country with kindness. Help me welcome Pastor Henry Williams Jr. of Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church in Alexandria, Louisiana, to WSKY SkyRock Talk Radio. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us and share, Pastor.
Thank you so much, Roger, and thanks for inviting me to your podcast.
What I want to do to start off with is give you an opportunity to give us your history and background, because you are originally from this area, but you've traveled the world, ended up in California,
Right.
and here you are back in Alexandria.
Right.
So kind of tell us your history.
Well, here's the deal. When I graduated from Alexandria Senior High in 1974, I received the music scholarship to Northwestern, performing scholarship, and I went to Northwestern for 3 years there and became pretty good on my saxophone, jazz-wise, and so I got an opportunity to go to the West Coast, to California, to kind of get my teeth cut in the industry and get with some great musicians. So I took advantage of that after about 3.5 years of college at Northwestern. I went to Northern California, formed a super group. That group did a lot of playing in the Northern California area for some prestigious gigs and residency at a place called, at that time, the Dock of the Bay, which was one of the greatest prestigious high-end clubs in the Bay Area. Gave me an opportunity to play for some great people, Angela Davis, Marty King, who was Martin Luther King's son. He and I became friends at that time. I'm not name dropping, but just some things that kind of went on in that setting. So we formed a great group, and that group toured Japan and a couple other places. I'd gone to Europe and done some playing in Europe before then. But during one of those tours, I went on a tour as a musician on a religious quest, and at that time I was seeking several different elements of the truth in reference to religion. I was searching religion at that time, but not necessarily searching for God. So I was really into religion, studying the Bhagavad Gita, the I Ching, Yin Yang Chinese philosophy book, and a good friend of mine was of the Nation of Islam at that particular time. So that compelled me to get into the Quran. And so I was just on this great religious quest of trying to find the truth in religion. And while I was in Japan, I ended up finding the truth in God. And he spoke to me while in Japan on tour. As a result of that, I came back to the States and was kind of struggling on what to do with my music, my horn, and that kind of stuff. And so I dedicated my life to Christ at that time, rededicated my life as an adult to Christ. And the rededication of that, took me through a journey of searching as to what exactly I was supposed to do in that. And eventually I received a definite calling and purpose, that my purpose and my calling was to deliver the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I did that at a local church in Northern California for approximately 25 years, and as a result of me coming back and forth to Alexandria and visiting my mom, whose health was declining at that particular time. This was like 1999, 2000s, in that period of time. And I start seeing the need and the pulling and the tugging for me to relocate back here. And I struggled with that for a few years because I didn't really want to come back to Central Louisiana, North or South, period, because I was all settled. Kids had been born and raised in California, so that had really become my home. So as a result of that, God, he tugged at my heart and spoke in different ways, and me being the stubborn person I am, he had to kind of grab me by my collar and say, "This is what I want you to do," and basically, that's what he did, because and when he did that, I answered that call and came back here. We organized this particular ministry at Macedonia Church. We organized this ministry in 2001 it was, and it was right after my mom had passed, and so we came back and organized this church. Started off with a few people, like 4 people here, with a vision, with a plan, and that vision and that plan, now after 20 years, a lot of labor, a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and a whole bunch of tears, here we are, and the whole focus of this ministry is we're grassroots. We go where nobody else. We're not the pretty church. We're down in the trenches. I was thinking the other day is that we're in a time now where a lot of people are nourishing the bleeding, but no one really wants to go down to where the wound really is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the challenges of our ministry, is that we're going down to the core of a lot of problems that's plaguing our society today.
A little bit of the research I did behind the word Macedonia, relating to the Bible.
Right.
It means burning.
Yes.
And adoration.
Yes.
And it was in Philippi, Macedonia, where Paul and Silas was imprisoned, worshipped, and was able to save the jailer and got free.
Absolutely, absolutely. And another interesting piece to that is that, the late great Jimmy Rack Sr., who well known in this community, he had he and my sister Joyce started a garbage and recycling company back in the probably 70s, and they grew that company tremendously to one of the largest in the state. Well, he was kind of like my mentor in life, and as I was coming back, rest of my story, as I was coming back and forth, he shared in that vision with me to come here to start a ministry. There were some other factors that had plagued around it, but the main core is that it was Jimmy Rax who was calling me to come to Alexandria to start this ministry. Okay, so he kept calling me, and spiritually, and we would talk several times, and he's nicknamed me Kid because I was his younger brother. So he would always say, "Kid, you need to come back here. Your ministry is needed here with God is." And so I fought with that. But here's the interesting aspect of this whole thing about Macedonia, is that when I finally accepted the call to come here, I had another name for this church, and it wasn't Macedonia. And so as I was preparing, God stopped me, because what happened in Macedonia was that Paul had a vision of a man in Macedonia saying, "Come over here and help us." But when Paul got to Macedonia, that man was gone. And he didn't see the man. He just found the women down by the riverside worshiping. Jimmy was the person that was calling me to come to organize this ministry. But when I came, he had gone on to be with the Lord. He wasn't here. So the person who was my mentor, who was driving this, and the person who was really sharing in this vision with me, doing the calling, just like Paul. When Paul got to Macedonia, he only found a few women by the riverside worshiping. When I came here, Jimmy was gone. I had buried Jimmy. I'd been here a few months prior to it and had done his homegoing. But when I decided to come back here, he wasn't here. There were only about 3 women that were waiting for me to organize them. And so the Lord said to me is that you can call this ministry whatever you want, but it's Macedonia. And so that's how it got settled into that name. It was God that spoke to me and said, it's identical. Just look at it. A man calling Paul, come over here to help us. Okay. Paul gets to Macedonia. There's no man, just women. And that's where we started this ministry.
Wow. At
that point. So from day one, God has had his hand on this whole movement, this whole ministry. And we've been thankful.
This year, 2023 marks 60 years
Yes.
of Pastor Martin Luther King Jr. giving his I Have a Dream speech. And I want to stress, Pastor, because within the world, in the society, they want us to forget that he was a pastor.
Absolutely.
And they always want us to refer to him as Dr. Martin Luther King.
Absolutely.
But he was a pastor.
He was a pastor. Absolutely.
And so going back 60 years and just reading a part of his I Have a Dream speech and getting some comments from you, he said in his speech, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, all mankind are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. From every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands. And that's been 60 years ago.
60 years ago. Very powerful, very provocative and persuasive. However, when we hear that speech from 60 years ago, and we would expect progress from it.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's been 60 years. We should be seeing progress.
We should be seeing progress. But we've seen maybe 2 to 3 times more digression since that speech than progression. And it's very unfortunate because we have to understand that we are living in, and let me say this on the onset, one of the greatest countries in the world, America, okay? But we got some serious skeletons in our closet that we are afraid to identify. And those powerful words of Dr. King in his dream, in his vision, are almost, and I don't want to sound like a pessimist in this, but they're almost impossible to attain on the track that we're on from the very conception of America. And again, I am one who benefits from the greatness. So at the risk of biting the hand that feeds us, we have to be able to recognize just what's going on. And from day one, and it will always be, there will always be a discrepancy in how things are viewed between white America and black America. Those things have always been there from the very conception of this country. And we understand, even if we were to go back from the time of enslaved people and the Atlantic slave trade, which ultimately ended and was became illegal, after the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, the reality is that even then, a black man, and not even a woman, but a black man, vote counted 1/5. So basically, the message to the black man from the very conception of the Emancipation Proclamation is that you're 1/5 of the man, okay? So those things had been deeply embedded into the fibers of the thinking, and we have so many different elements that comes along with that, is that we have to understand that, we use this word, that we need to reconcile, okay? But you can't reconcile something that wasn't there in the beginning to reconcile. It's just like if you're in a relationship, with your wife, your girlfriend, or whatever, and you say we need to reconcile. Well, you got to have something there in the beginning. We've never had anything to reconcile, so we need to stop this whole thing about we need to reconcile black and white. No, we can't reconcile something that has never been there. This has always been a problem, always been a challenge. And as a result of that, we're seeing the residual effect of that separative thinking, and it's we see it. We look at, here's the thing, and you know this from your time that you shared educating children, and from situations that are not as prevalent or high up as others. I'm trying to say this the right way. But you know this yourself, that we see every day the results of it. We see young African American kids struggling. We see results of redlining and housing back in 50, 60 years ago. We see the results of all these things. We see the results of crack cocaine destroying the fibers of the African American family in the 80s. And by the way, if I could put a pin right here, that right there derailed Dr. King's dream right there, because things were starting to happen towards the manifestation of that dream. And I'm not this conspiracist and all this other stuff, but I do know that there is an unspoken method that is designed not by a person, but a system itself, to entrap a certain people, to keep them in a certain particular place. And we're seeing the results of that. We're seeing racism like we've never seen it before, and again, we see racism as we've never seen it before because there are more reasons now to see it. And I don't just mean social media and that kind of, but what I'm really saying is that because there's such a wider gap now, it's more obvious. I'm a baby boomer, and racism has always been a part of our lives. You and I come from totally different backgrounds, but the things that were instilled in us from a moral perspective are those things that make us the people that we are today. But coming up as a baby boomer, that gap wasn't as wide. That gap is wider. You see it clearer now. So now it's easier to identify racism, much easier now than it was a few years ago. So everybody says it seems like it's getting worse. It's not getting worse. It's just becoming easier to identify because the gap is starting to get wider. And you see the gap is getting wider, and you see young African American people that are becoming subjected to this gap, this setup. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just a systemic setup. And once we understand that it's a systemic setup, then there's no one person to grab by the collar and say, stop it. It's a system,
Yeah. One of our introductory statements and mottos of SkyRock Talk Radio is we've been diving into setbacks that were really setups for major success stories. And so when we read the Bible, which is God's Word, we see a lot of God's people experiencing setbacks, but they were really in God's plan, which was really a setup for a major success story.
Right.
And so one of my first questions, of course, is how does the Bible or God define setbacks? Or how does God want us to look at setbacks in our life? Or what is the attitude, which is a major factor of how we should look at setbacks? I had recently interviewed my pastor, Pastor Josh McElwee of One Life Church of Alexandria, and what he said was setbacks are a normal part of life. No one is going to go through this life without having any setbacks. Even the biggest heroes of God, that was always the case. They were always going to have setbacks. But in Scripture, we are told to rejoice over setbacks, over trials, over difficulties, pain and tribulations, things like that, because of the character that works in us. Because the idea of Scripture is character works in us through those trials and setbacks and is more valuable than maybe whatever we were going after. because that setback, that character change happens in our life due to that trial. It really cannot be obtained any other way. The setback changes our character from the inside out.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. And one of the things that we need to really, when we talk about setbacks, is that setbacks always, they're relative to a particular point. If someone says that this is a setback, it's a setback from a particular point that I'm being set back from. And I think what we have to really keep in mind is that with God, He's God all by Himself. And here's the thing that we struggle with as people is that we live in time, but God is infinite. And because God is infinite, the words that He speaks are not relative to time. But our regulation of the word, what God speaks to us, how we measure it, is based in time. So now, if we are experiencing what we call a setback, that setback is relative to a point that God has already designed for us. And remember, the promises of God are yea. If He speaks it, it's done. It has nothing to do with time. It has nothing to do with distance. It has nothing to do with a relative point. None of these things. It's just God say it is, and it's going to happen. Our challenge is that we operate in time, and we can only think linear in this finite mind. Will only allow us linear thinking, and so because of that, and because we operate in time, the biggest element of operating in time is patience, and that's why God says faith is the substance of things hoped for, right? Mm-hmm. The evidence of things that are not seen. So faith requires patience to wait. Okay, so now if we say that this is a particular setback, then that's saying that this thing didn't happen on my time schedule. And so because it didn't happen on my time schedule, then I have to reevaluate this. And that's where the character change comes in.
Yes.
Is reevaluating, because first of all, we got to realize that God is not a setback in God's eyesight. It's a setback in our eyesight, because I said by this particular time, this is where I'm going to be. Okay, I'm not there. This is a setback. So I'm struggling with this because I'm being impatient in the timing. And we got to always remember is that God does not think time. We think linear. God doesn't think linear. He just is. So when I'm frustrated in a setback, is because what I thought was going to happen didn't happen.
That's good. That's really good. One of the recent social media posts that you made just recently said the destination has gotten lost in the journey. We talk more about what we're going through as opposed to where we're going.
Absolutely.
Explain some of that.
Absolutely. More. Here's the thing: is that, and I'm speaking this from the standpoint of from this aspect of the church itself. We have forgotten that this is all about discipleship. This is about, Jesus says that I and my Father are one. Okay? Jesus says that where I go, ye shall go also. I go to prepare a place for you. Jesus says that I and my Father are one. If you believe in me, then you are in this relationship. So basically what Jesus is telling us is that he and his Father are one. And Jesus is inviting us into that relationship with he and his Father. And so now the importance of our talk, the value of what we talk about is in the fact of being with God. Rather than me being so focused on the things that are around me. We talk more about people that don't like us. We talk more about our haters. We talk more about how to get over a relationship. And those things are, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and those things are humanly relative to our struggle. But when that becomes the element, if I'm so focused on my struggles as opposed to where I'm going, then my struggles have no purpose. So now, if I get out of the what's going on the journey and focus on where I'm going in the journey, then that makes the journey possible and enjoyable. When we were living in California, and my mom and dad were still living here in Alexandria, obviously, we would make at least 1 to 2 trips a year. And, with the kids, it was too expensive to fly, so we pack everybody in the car and we drive cross country. We did it several times. And going from California to Alexandria was a 2-day journey. But what made the journey so enjoyable was I knew that soon I'd see my mama. So all the driving, this and whatever came with the journey was okay, because the only thing was on my mind was I'll be home soon to see my parents again. So now here we are on earth. When we stop and think that the joy of our existence is to being home with our Savior, so now all this stuff that we're going through, it's real, but it's not relevant. We can't demise the fact that we struggle here. But the reality is that we got to know that the joy is I'm on this journey to get to see my Father.
That's good.
You feel me, man?
Yeah, that's good. Giving you the last closing comments and perhaps some contact information just in case somebody wants to reach out to you. Let me read this statement and get you some comments from it.
Okay.
It says, setbacks makes us worry and wonder where God is and if we will ever recover. Our failure is not final. Our failure is not fatal. But if we let God, He will use our failure as a fuel for our future. In fact, our future is wrapped up in how we respond to our failure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is what Jesus says. He says, James wrote this. He says, now unto Him who's able to keep us from falling and present us faultless. Okay, now what are you saying here? He's now unto Him who's able to keep us from falling, but yet it appears as though I fall. Okay, yes, we do. But in our falling and in our failures, what comes out of our failures is a closer relationship and bond. For example, there was one time when I was at Northwestern, I called myself was going to do the ROTC thing and come out and get a free ride. And okay, so now, but we had to propel across Sibley Lake in Natchitoches, and I wasn't a swimmer at that time. My line broke and I fall in the lake, right? And so as I'm drowning in the lake, this guy pulls me up out of the lake, okay? I'll never forget, this guy pulled me up out of the lake. Now, that guy and I bonded because he saved my life, okay? Every time I fall, I'm falling crucially where I could really destroy my life. But every time I fall, he's there to cushion the fall and pick me up. So every time I fall, I look up at him and I say, whoa, and we just get closer. We get closer. So yes, the things that we struggle with in life as people, what we call failures, and again, remember, failures are measurable, okay? We're failing because we didn't reach a certain place or a certain standard at a certain time when I thought I should reach there. And in my mind, I failed. Okay,
that's good. That's a powerful statement.
You feel me, bro?
Yeah, I do.
That's failure. Failure is only based upon what I have designed to where I'm going to go, or what I'm going to do, or who I should be. Anything other than that is delusional. So, and a lot of times, you know, we confuse failure with delusion, and delusion is just us creating a false reality and living in that false reality and not accepting any other concept except that false reality. If somebody present the truth to you, delusional says that this is my reality, I've created it, and I'm going to live in this delusional reality. And somebody say, you know, no, that's not the way it is. And you say, no, is it? So anything other than that is delusion. So a lot of times our delusional thinking causes us to fail because we've created this false reality. We've created this false measurement. And these false measurements says, I'm failing. And God is saying to us, no, you're not failing. You just, you know, that's just one thing on the road that you were going through. It's not failure. It's going through it, you know. It's like the marathon runner. You know, the marathon runner, as he or she is running the marathon runner has designed stations along the 26 miles that will supply nutrients and carbs for the runner. And so that person knows, but prior to that particular station, that person has designed those stations, the coach has, to where this is where you're going to be failing. So this is what you're going to need right here. And that's what God has done. God knows on this race, it's this marathon that we're running. He knows us so well, he set up stations. And if you notice, every time when we think we're about to give up, something will come along to encourage us to move on.
How can someone contact you?
I can be reached obviously through our social media platforms, mainly through our Facebook page. You can find me at Pastor Henry Williams Jr., Alexandria, Louisiana, or Macedonia Church, or even our YouTube channel, Macedonia Church. Or you can reach us by phone, text at 318-229-1812. Or you can mail us at 1800 England Drive, Alexandria, Louisiana, 71303.